Hello and welcome to this video, and this is a Philosophy Sunday video. I don't know how much philosophy is going to be on this one, to be honest, but I did have an idea and I'm going to do it, and then you're going to watch it hopefully. So as you could see, I am sat back in my old studio where my YouTube channel started. It looks a lot different now. It actually looks quite magnificent on camera. I'm surrounded by all sorts of different items, ornaments, dancers, books, paintings, bits of stereo equipment, you know, DVDs, all sorts of different things. And I thought it would be fun to actually have an explore of what's here and just talk about some of the items and what they mean to me. And so that's what I'm going to do. Where we go with this, I don't know. I hope you enjoy this journey. Some of you might go, well, this will be quite interesting. And something, oh, I don't want to watch this. I want to be told something. I want Andy to say he's going to tell me something, like the 10 greatest feats in rock and roll. And then I want him to say the 10 greatest feat in rock and roll. And then he can go through, you know, them, and I will argue with him about it and be upset, you know. But I can't do that. Instead, what you're going to get is me talking about certain things that I haven't spoken about before. Now, with all this stuff in here, I'm pulling out all the stuff that's in the house. There's old boxes of books, and I'm bringing it on. It's all going into here. The house is going to be all sparse. You know, I'm gonna have it all lovely and sparse, and all the stuff will be here. I bought loads of empty shelves over there. They're not full yet, but they will be full of items. And there's masses of items in here, things you wouldn't expect. So I think we'll start with this fella, actually. So I've got stuff like this in here. Now this here is from the 1970s. It belongs to my parents, and it is basically a jar for pickled onions. And what I like about it is that, and I think I'm gonna use that as a thumbnail. But if that doesn't bring him in, nothing will. So what they would do in the 70s, they never do this now, but what they've got is they've actually made a pickled onion that you can put your pickled onions in. And this pickled onion, it says pickled onions sometimes, because that's where it was built. So my mom and Dad would have bought this in the early 70s. We went on holiday to St. Tyres. And then they've got this pickled onion's got a face. Look how unhappy he is. He's so grumpy. And why is he grumpy? Because he's an onion. And because he's an onion, he's continually crying. And I like the idea of that. I like the imagination. And this idea that you can be born as something, and you can, in being born that way, you can be cursed with depression. It's like the embodiment of mental health there in this pickled onion. There's an emporium in my town. I've actually done a video in there. If you go and look, you'll find it. And there was a whole rack of all those different pickled onion types. But we're not going to be going talking about pickled onions and embodied mental health issues in 1970s earthenware. We're not going to be talking about that. When I came in here, I thought, what is the first thing I'm going to pick up on this video and talk about? And so this is the most important bit of the video. This is where we start, and it's this book here. Colin Wilson's A Criminal History of Mankind. Now, I've spoken about this at length on a video that's over on my politics channel, which is called Nothing, Anything or Something, or it could be Something, Nothing or Anything, or it could be Anything, Something. I can't remember what order I've put them in. Anyway, that's by the by, isn't it? On this channel, I am going to be getting more political. It's called Something, Nothing, Anything, or no, it's called Nothing, Something, I can't remember. It's part of the enjoyment for me, is I can't quite tell you the title of it, but it's the links down below. And I've done a whole video talking about Colin Wilson, and I don't want to go on about it, but the fact is probably nearly 40 years ago, I got stranded in Wolverhampton, because it snowed. And the following day, when the person I was staying with went off to work, I was stuck with nothing to do, so I got some wellies on that I found, and I walked down into the town and I bought this book, which I bought for salacious reasons. Oh, this will be a good read, reading about all crime, rapes and murders and serial killers. And when I read it, it blew my mind. Colin Wilson was a writer in the 1950s that explored a sort of new existentialism. It was like a very British take on existentialism, and he explored the human potential, mysticism, and he looked at sort of the sex impulse. He looked at crime, serial killers, and he pulled all this into a very compelling mixture of history, mysticism, the occult. I found it incredibly compelling.
So in some way, you see, the question of how to create the peak experience depends upon realizing that this is a norm of ordinary human consciousness. It's a perception, the peak. It's not an emotion, it's a perception. You turn your face in that direction towards the peak experience, and it's like looking at something that gives you pleasure, like a mother looking at a baby. You just suddenly bubble over.
There were two characters that came out of this book that I found very interesting. One was a guy called Julian Jaynes, who wrote a book called The Origin of Consciousness in the Bicameral Mind, which I went and bought, although if it's in here, I don't know where it is. And the other guy that he was mentioned in this book that I found fascinating as a character was Gurdjieff.
Imagine a man who spent decades traveling the world, studying ancient spiritual secrets, and unraveling the mysteries of the human soul. A man whose teachings have influenced some of the greatest minds of the 20th century, yet remains shrouded in mystery. George Gurdjieff was not just a philosopher, not just a mystic. He was a guide who challenged the very way we think. But who was he really? Why does his story still intrigue and confound us to this day?
Oh my God. And this is something that this is the thing that's going on for me, is that at some point I've stuck this book into the thing and it's trapped a CD in it, and the CD's just dropped out, and I've been looking for this CD. This is a Vibe Station by Scott Henderson. It's absolutely incredible. Scott is at the peak of his powers at the moment, as far as I'm concerned, and he's recording what he wants to record, taking the time to do it properly, and this is absolutely a wonderful album. And if you could see, Scott actually sent it me, and I have, thanks Andy, with Scott Henderson. I cannot believe that life has turned out like that, so I'm glad I found that. And that was contained within this book, and this book is another very important book in my life. If I open it up, you can see it's got a name there, Ian Stonehouse. Ian Stonehouse is now a lecturer at Goldsmiths, I believe, in electronic music. Very important guy for me in the early days, because we did a lot of music together, and he was interested in Brian Eno, Frank Zappa, experimental electronic music, and so he was very important for me in giving me a different view of how to record, you know. Anyway, once I'd read Criminal History of Mankind and I'd got interested in Gurdjieff, my lecturer at college, who was an Indian gentleman called Parish Chakraborty, I wasn't doing too well, and he grabbed me aside once and sat me down, and he spoke to me. And he spoke to me about mysticism, and he spoke to me about Gurdjieff, and I just read about him in this Colin Wilson book, and this was very strange. And this has happened a lot in my life. At certain points, things happen in a way we think, well, this is too weird, you know. So I got this Gurdjieff guy has come at me and said, what the hell's this bloke? So I went round to see my friend Ian, and I said, you know, Parish, I went to see him the other day, and he mentioned Gurdjieff. And I said, do you know anything about him? And he said, yeah, he was, Ouspensky's written about him. I said, who's Ouspensky? He goes, he's like a mystical mathematician that was around about the same time. And I'd read about this Ouspensky, so I was like, oh yeah, I think I read about this in the book as well. oh, I'd love to get some books on this. And Ian literally went, there you go. And he handed me his copy of P.D. Ouspensky's A New Model of the Universe. This is why it's his book. I've still got it. He loaned it to me about 38 years ago, and I've still got it. I took this home and opened it up, and I got past the introduction, and then we get to the first chapter. There. Esotericism and modern thought. This chapter just blew me away, because what he did with this chapter in describing the esoteric, it was obvious the esoteric has to exist, and that esoteric knowledge is only available to those who have been on the journey to get to that knowledge. It's only knowledge that you can acquire. A brain surgeon will have knowledge about the brain, which they will have revelations about the brain that only they can have, because they understand the esoteric aspects of the brain. Within that, there must be sort of esoteric knowledge in the general idea, and I found this very, very, very interesting. As this book carries on, he then starts to talk about the fourth dimension. He talks about eternal recurrence. There's a chapter on yoga, there's a chapter on the tarot, there's a chapter on Christianity. A lot of my ideas are germinated in this book, right? And I was able then to track down, which I will grab now, another book here. And this is an original copy, I think, or pretty not original copy, but it's an old copy. In Search of the Miraculous, also by P.D. Ouspensky. That was the first book that I got where I was able to really start to study what Gurdjieff was about. This is Ouspensky's take on Gurdjieff's teaching. I don't want to get into Gurdjieff here, because I know if I start to talk about it, I will be here for a long time, and it's not the place. I'm trying to find you some of the stuff that. So this is the sort of Gurdjieff idea that you will have picked up if you watch my channel. Here is the ray of creation. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That's the law of 7. We have the law of 3 and we have the law of 7. And in the ray of creation, there is an ascendancy of sort of celestial beings, if you like, which starts with the moon, then has the earth, and then has all the planets, then the sun, and then all worlds, and then the absolute. And this gives you this idea of ascendancy from where we're at. Don't worry that the moon's the first one. That you have to get into sort of Gurdjieffian world to understand that. But this idea that things are moving upwards and they are becoming one as they move up. This has influenced me greatly. You could see I've highlighted certain passages. I really did study this book a lot. I really did. Very difficult book. These are the 3 essential Gurdjieff books, I would say. I've got a lot of books on Gurdjieff. I've got The Fourth Way by P.D. Ouspensky. That's another great analysis of his work. Good place to start with Gurdjieff is his autobiography of his early life, which is called Meetings with Remarkable Men. This was made into a film in the late 70s, and it starred I think Terence Stamp was in it, who died this week, so it's nice to have mentioned Terence Stamp. So, you know, great actor and a good film, especially the footage of the Gurdjieff movements in there, which is actual Gurdjieff school. I think it's Madame de Saltzman's school. There's no way this is true, but it's a story that is quite interesting to read. It's a short book, and that is an essential book for Gurdjieff. There is a book which is a sort of it's known as All and Everything, but it's got the title more commonly as Life is Real Only Then When I Am. And that's Gurdjieff's explanation himself, taken from his lectures that other people wrote down, I believe, of his sort of worldview and his method, his the way, the system. But if you really want to try and understand Gurdjieff, you have to deal with this. And this is called Beelzebub's Tale to His Grandson. It's almost like the Bible of Gurdjieff, and it's an incredible book. I haven't read it all. And the reason I haven't read it all is because it's very difficult to read. It's a story about Beelzebub, and Beelzebub is in a spaceship, and he's traveling to Earth on some business, and he talks to his grandson, and he tells the grandson about Earth and the people on it. And so it basically explains this esoteric view of everything. The All and Everything series, I've just realized, is these 3 books, right? Now, the way Gurdjieff wrote it, he wrote it in a way that is so wordy that you have to take each sentence and study it to get the meaning out of it. I've opened at the book, and there's a point here that I've just opened it at when they're actually talking about the meanings of words. And I will read you some of it so you'd start to realize how wordy it is, and how to truly appreciate this book, you would have to take it sentence by sentence, get the meaning of the sentence, move on, and you would have to do this across the 1,234 pages. So there is a point when here on page 234 where the grandson of Beelzebub turns round and he says to Beelzebub, "My dear grandfather, during your tales you have already many times used the expression has namos. I have until now understood only from the intonation of your voice and from the consonants of the word itself that by this expression you define those 3 brain beings whom you always set apart from others as if they deserved objective contempt. Be so kind as to always and explain to me the real meaning and exact sense of this word. What does the word has namos mean?" That's what he's asking him. Whereupon Beelzebub, with a smile inherent to him, said as follows: "Concerning the typicality of those 3 brain beings for whom I have adopted this verbal definition, I shall explain to you at the proper time, but meanwhile know that this word designates every already definitized common presence of the 3 brain being, both those consisting only of the single planetary body as well as those whose higher being bodies are already coated in them, and which for some reason or other data have not been crystallized for the divine impulse of the objective consciousness. Having said only this, we find the word happy to get the speak. During my detailed study of the mentioned religious teachings, I've also clarified finally coated with the presence of a brain. There has Now, that's like a populist book. I love books like this. 100 Scientists Who Changed the World. And I can skim through this here and go, what did Nikola Tesla do? And then I can get an idea. What did this fella do? I can't even say his name. The Immanuel Kant's Critique of Pure Reason. Philosophy Made Simple. The Penguin Guide to Jazz. This is thorough. It's thorough. And so this book is basically rankings of different jazz albums. And if you search through certain albums in this book, they sometimes have a black square next to them, which means they're like really, really important, like one of the great albums of all time. We've got Billy Childs, Ed Cherry, you know, and I have tons of these types of encyclopedias. This one was very useful. This came out just after the sort of big British jazz boom after Courtney Pine. I think the writers involved in this, which is Richard Cook and Brian Morton, very esteemed writers, and they brought with them a sort of snotty approach to jazz, which I was very aware I didn't agree with. And you pick this up. I haven't arrived at these ideas about jazz through just having my own prejudice. It's having to deal with this type of jazz criticism. Let's go to John McLaughlin here and see what it actually says about John McLaughlin. And hopefully some of you will be as annoyed as me by what he says. Oh, it's weird when you're on the internet. You just put the name in, it's there, and you get all annoyed, and here I am. Now, actually, let's go to the Mahavishnu Orchestra, actually, because I think they got a separate section for the Mahavishnu Orchestra. Or they haven't. This isn't great YouTubing. Right, so they have looked at the Inner Mountain Flame, Birds of Fire, Between Nothingness and Eternity, Apocalypse, Visions of the Emerald Beyond, and the best of the Mahavishnu Orchestra. Inner Worlds they have not looked at. Or have they looked at the newer albums that came out in the 80s? No, I'm going to read you this so that I'm going to offer my take on it. The Inner Mountain Flame has the maximum 4 stars, but it does not have, it's not a black square, I've just seen it, it's a crown. It doesn't have the crown. I think that album deserves the crown. It's one of the most important albums in jazz history, but they haven't done that. Birds of Fire, they've given 3 stars. Good, which means good. Between Nothingness in Eternity, they've given 3 stars. Apocalypse, they have only given 2 stars. Visions of the Emerald Beyond, the greatest album ever made, they had only given 2 stars. And on the personnel for Visions of the Emerald Beyond, it says John McLaughlin plus other personnel unidentified, and that's wrong because it is unidentified on that album, on both the CD and the album. I imagine that they had the later vinyl edition perhaps, which didn't have it on. It was on a blue piece of paper that came inside. Let's just read what they say about Visions of the Emerald Beyond. So where shall we start? Unfortunately, Columbia have not drawn the great veil of kindly oblivion over the expanded orchestra's subsequent recordings. So at this point, pre-internet, record companies put albums out, and certain albums were out and you could get them, and other albums out you couldn't get. Columbia reissued the Mahavishnu Orchestra albums, and they're complaining here that Columbia have reissued the second incarnation of the Mahavishnu Orchestra. They're saying that the great veil of kindly oblivion should have been put over these records. This is their attitude towards them. Apocalypse and Visions of the Emerald Beyond, apart from flashes of quality from replacement violinist Jean-Luc Ponty, these are drearily directionless as the three quintet albums are forceful. Developing the line McLaughlin had begun with Extrapolation and Where Fortune Smiles. So they don't really give any reason why they think they're so dreary and terrible, but they do, think they're pretty dreary and terrible. Now, if we go to the John McLaughlin section, because I remember this is all coming back to me now, they have given his debut album, which was called Extrapolation, they have given that 4 stars and a little crown. So as far as they're concerned, Extrapolation is John McLaughlin's high point, and there is an attitude towards that, towards John McLaughlin, that is the case. Extrapolation is one of the finest jazz records ever made in Europe, ranging between gently meditative runs on piece to furious 13/8 scrabbles. It combines all of McLaughlin's virtues, accuracy, power, vision on a single disc. It is transferred to CD recently, blah, 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 The band was state-of-the-art in 1969. Oxley's drumming has a firmness of a rock beat, even when the count is extremely irregular. John Summers playing is cast midway between folksy melodizing and complete abstraction. Tie a chair to any British jazz fan who came of age between 1967 and 1972, and a substantial number will confess that Binky's Beam is their favourite track of all time. This is a certain attitude, right? It's extremely informative. I love the idea that this book does talk about quality, that one album's better than the other. I love the fact that they say what they think. I don't agree with it, but this book, as you can see, I've doodled all over it. There's like pencil marks. It's just full of all sorts of things here. So including a bank account number of somebody. Oh, it's interesting. Shall we move away from the books now and see what else is contained within this room? Well, here's something of interest. How about a bicycle lyre? This was given to me by my drum tech. It's a lyre. And I don't mean it goes around telling fibs. It's like a lyre that the Greeks would have. You strum it. You could tune it with these pegs here, and it's made out of a bicycle frame. And if you look closely, there's a pickup on it as well. We've got a pickup here, and that pickup is wired into, you can plug this in. So yeah, that's my bicycle lyre. An interesting object. Can't get much of a tune out of it, but it does the job. You can get a chord out of it. two young girls dancing in white, and then we've got two older women looking very sinister in black here, hidden within the trees. It seems to be a sort of life and death as the sun goes down, or maybe the sun's coming up, we don't know. So what else have we got? Let's go have a look at the DVDs. I have a film channel, so let's grab some. I'll grab 5 films that I love. I've literally got a box down here, must have 200 DVDs. There's a huge box in the back with probably 400 DVDs in, and then we have that whole section there of DVDs, and I have already thrown away, I would say, 500 already. And when I'm throwing them away, it's like a whim. You can't make it, so then you throw something away and you think, oh, now I don't need any of them. I could throw them all away, but I don't want to do it. That's a big dilemma I've got at the moment. I've just grabbed 3 here. So the first one I grabbed was one of the greatest films ever made, The Red Shoes. Possibly the greatest film ever made about art, music, creative, of artists ever made. It's just incredible. Powell and Pressburger, of course, are my favourite filmmakers. I've got virtually everything by them. I have a film channel. It's sort of not really doing much at the moment. It's called The Magic Box. But the point is when they get there, right, there seems to be a power structure there, and that seems to be the enemy. But what you find out is not that. The real evil, the heart of Star Wars is evil, is not the people who are running the show.
Come in, Lancaster. Are you bailing out?
Yes, Jude, I'm bailing out, but there's a catch. I've got no parachute.
Hello and welcome to this video, and on this video I am going to be ranking the films of Powell and Pressburger.
The bomb must never go off.
If you want to see a brilliant example of that, go and check out Freddie Starr telling the story to Muhammad Ali.
He opens the door and there's an old lady with a blanket around her and she's shivering.
If you go over to the Magic Box, there's links down below. There is a whole video on Powell and Pressburger. I've also done ranked all the Carry On films. I've sat down with Tim Bonus and ranked the James Bond films. It's a fun channel, so you know, it is what it is. Another incredible film, Night of the Hunter, 1955. One of the greatest films ever made. Robert Mitchum and Shelley Winters. Robert Mitchum embodies sort of the dialectic of good and bad, you know, with his love and hate on the knuckles. But he is really a truly bad man, and he's terrifying in it. And this is the only film ever directed by Charles Lawton, and he does an incredible job. There is no other film like it. I don't know if anyone's seen that. It's an incredible film. I have loads of music DVDs. Just grab this one, Audio Slave Live in Cuba. Billions of them, as you would expect. All About Eve, right? This is one of the greatest films about creative pursuits. In this case, acting, you know, writing, the theatre. An incredible film, and a brilliant bit of acting from Bette Davis in this. I've got a great big picture of Bette Davis in the house because I'm a huge fan. And we also get a very young Marilyn Monroe appearing, and she's pretty, well, pretty, I suppose. She's pretty charismatic, you know, as she created just the beginning of her creating the sort of Marilyn Monroe idea, which becomes the sort of platonic idea of the sex symbol. And of course, I have tons of silly British comedies. Anyone who watches my channel knows where I'm coming at when it comes to this type of thing. And people who know my politics might be a bit surprised at this, but I've got some politics books up here. I'm going to pull one out. Hidden Agendas, John Pilger. I think people will be surprised, but you will actually see that within my thinking is there is a left-wing stream, and it comes from people like John Pilger. I was a big fan of John Pilger. Shame when he died a few years back. He occupied a very important space in basically calling out totalitarianism, calling out, you know, the mistreatment of people, and relating it into, you know, Western culture and our way of doing things and seeing things. So yeah, a big fan of Pilger. In terms of philosophy, I can't find the Simon Blackburn book, but my thing about philosophy is that I never felt that I was lacking the ability to explore my interests and get directed towards a certain philosopher and read them and get something from them. That was never an issue. That's why I was interested in philosophy. But when you chat to academic philosophers, and I have done, they know the whole thing. They have an incredible knowledge of the whole of philosophy, in the same way as I have a reasonable knowledge of 20th century, you know, popular music and jazz and stuff like that. I've got a really good knowledge of that, and I can go into that and move around in that and compare one epoch of music making to another and see how it influences. With philosophy, which is, you know, like 3,000 years old, it's harder to do that, to get that idea of all the main ideas that are out there and how they all relate together. The incredible achievement in doing this is, of course, Bertrand Russell's A History of Western Philosophy, which, of course, does not cover 20th century philosophy, but in terms of giving you an idea of the shape of philosophy, and in great detail, he does not shy away from it. And Bertrand Russell was not just a great philosopher, but also a charismatic person and a great writer. And it's a great book. I can remember enjoying reading this, you know, in my 20s when I eventually got a copy of it. This, very esoteric. This is by Colin Harper, Echoes from Then, Glimpses of John McLaughlin. This really is very interesting in that it explores John McLaughlin at a very young age and his career starting in the 1950s, and then his time, which is a significant period of time from 1960 to 1970 when he's working on the British scene, a period of time which is incredibly interesting because he's rubbing shoulders with everybody that is creating rock music, the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, Jeff Beck, Jimi Hendrix. He's either working with these people or he's around them, or sometimes not around them, which is surprising. But the point is that he's right in the middle of this. And John McLaughlin does not talk that much about that period. When he's asked about it, he comes up with a few stock answers. Colin Harper's books are incredible. Bathed in Lightning is a wonderful book, especially its exploration of that period and the later period of the Mahavishnu Orchestra. This one goes into even more depth and really gets into the real, and some of the photographs are incredible. Brilliant book. This book I've read quite recently and gave me a great knowledge of British jazz, which I didn't have before. It's by Simon Spillett, and it's called The Long Shadow of the Little Giant, and it's basically the life, work and legacy of Tubby Hayes, who was, you know, the great talent of 1950s, 1960s jazz, you know, who had addictive tendencies and died in the far too young of, I think, a heart attack in the 1970s, early 1970s. So yeah, there's all this stuff in here. Anyway, this has been a strange one. Philosophy Sunday. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, put a like on it. If you want to see some more, subscribe. You know, if you want to become a member of my Patreon, you can, or you can become a member of this channel here on YouTube. What else? I got a PayPal tip jar. You know, put the donation in there. That always helps. And thanks for having this sort of little voyage through this mad room. And I'll see you on the next video.
These vast cat heads were built underground and seen by no one.